As far as the toy industry goes, Nerf blasters, or toy guns in general, are easily one of the biggest parts of it. They're right up there with Legos. However, that doesn't mean there isn't a ton of things that people know about it. So I figured I would take it upon myself to make an entire iceberg chart based on all the really obscure information that a lot of people don't really seem to know about Nerf. So, without further ado, I'm Sir Mikey. Let's get started. So, as I stated before in a community post, I decided I would divide this iceberg chart into 4 videos. The first video would contain layers 1 and 2, which would go over all of the more well-known information. Then the second video would contain layer 3, then third layer 4, and then you get the idea, right? But yeah, this is the first video, so for now, I'll be covering strictly the more well-known information, you know, on the first couple of tiers and whatnot. Anyways, let's get started. Oh, but of course, before I do get on with the iceberg though, I figured I would explain how iceberg charts work for those of you who aren't aware of that. The way an iceberg chart works is it ranks information based on obscurity. The most well-known stuff is obviously going to appear towards the top of the iceberg, but as you move further down, information gets more and more obscure, and oftentimes it goes into some darker territory. So, without further ado, let's get started. I figured to kick off tier 1, I would go over Hasbro and the Nerf brand. Now, Hasbro is just the company that currently owns the Nerf brand, and they own a ton of other brands too, and have even partnered with a ton of other different franchises. Now, the Nerf brand wasn't always, owned by Hasbro. In fact, Hasbro didn't own the Nerf brand until, like, the 2000s, even though that brand has been around since 1969. The first Nerf blaster wasn't even created until 1992. So before then, Nerf was really about a ton of other different toys. In fact, the Nerf ball is actually what started the brand. It was a foam ball that was meant to be used for safe indoor play. But since then, Nerf has evolved into what we know of it as nowadays. Being a line of toy blasters and whatnot. But yeah, I figured there wasn't really anything else to cover for this entry because it's just really straightforward. So let's move on to the next one. What I mean by alternative brands here is basically any brand of Nerf blasters that isn't actually Nerf. So you've got Dart Zone, you've got Buzzbee, you've got Adventure Force, all that stuff. And then there's even a few other brands like Worker that, for the most part, don't even create full blasters, but rather they just create upgrades for blasters. Technically, I don't know if I can even call those brands, considering they're not exactly from a first-party company, but still, there's a ton of other options if you aren't really into Nerf for whatever reason. This entry is very straightforward. Basically, the series entry refers to any series in the Nerf brand, or even outside of the Nerf brand, because, Nerf is the only one to practice this. Think N-Strike Elite, Zombie Strike, Mega, Modulus, those kind of stuff. That is basically what a series is. It's a very straightforward subject. It's not really much more research that needs to be done on this. So without further ado, let's just get on to the next entry. So what repaints and reshells refers to is how a blaster can look different from another blaster, but it will be functionally identical. I haven't found too many good examples of blasters using different shells and retaining all the same functional features, but I've found plenty of examples of blasters using different colors and even having different names, but functionally being identical. Great example of this being the Rapid Strike, of course. How that was recolored and renamed the Stratahawk under the AccuStrike series, but was functionally identical to a Rapid Strike. Anyways, let's move on. So the magazine's entry obviously does not refer to the kind of magazine that you buy for like $3 and read. No. This is actually an entirely different definition of magazine. It is what a lot of blasters are usually fed through nowadays, and it has often become a preferred feeding system among Nerf blasters. Specifically the high performance ones. Sure, hoppers are really high performance because they can hold a ton of ammo, but those require gravity to work. Magazines, on the other hand, don't. And yeah, sure, Nerf officially calls them clips, but they are screwing up their terminology. That is not what they are. They are magazines, and you can tell because they have a spring-powered follower. Clips do not. But anyways, now that I've got that covered, let's move on to the next entry. So chances are, if you own a blaster that was recently released, it has some sort of compatibility with the N-Strike attachment system. Now, what this allows you to do is it allows you to fit on custom sights, grips, stocks, barrels, magazines, you name it. And a ton of blasters nowadays feature it. It was pretty much revolutionary back when it was first introduced, and even to this day, the hobby is still feeling the impact of that system's introduction. I mean, seriously, that is how important it was. Anyways, let's move on to the next entry. AccuStrike was a series of blasters that had the gimmick of, well, being more accurate, as the series name would suggest. But the magic of it all wasn't in the engineering of the blasters, because those were functionally identical to their counterparts if they had one prior to that. No, it was in the engineering of the ammo. The darts themselves were engineered to be more accurate, meaning the blasters themselves could take non-AccuStrike ammo perfectly fine. Now, obviously, there's no reason why you would want to use those, but still, it's nice that they allowed you to use normal Elite darts in case, for whatever reason, you didn't want to buy darts and waffle heads or AccuStrike darts. But anyways, let's move on to the next entry. So what the classes entry refers to is it's basically a term for designations of blasters based on their function. So like shotguns, ARs, snipers, SMGs, pistols. If you've played any shooter games, you probably already know what this is, so I'm just going to move on. So not a lot of people, especially nowadays, are aware of what the N-Strike Elite series gimmick was. Well, it was actually a performance boost compared to normal N-Strike. Now, unless you were around back when N-Strike Elite first launched, you probably didn't even know that. But back then, this was a big deal because stock class blasters nowadays are shooting as hard as modded blasters were back in the days of N-Strike. So yeah, N-Strike Elite was pretty innovative, and it really set a new bar. But anyways, let's get right onto the next entry. So basically what 1990s Nerf refers to is any Nerf blaster that was released prior to the year 2000. And this is because no Nerf blasters really existed prior to the year 1992. The first Nerf blaster to ever release was the Nerf Sharpshooter. And since then, many more blasters would release. Of course, most blasters that were released back in the 1990s are now heavily outdated by what we have nowadays, but a lot of people still consider many of them to be fun, and most of them have become collector's items nowadays. Frank Cooper, or as he's known on YouTube as Coop772, is heavily regarded as the best Nerf reviewer out there. Reason being is because he's very objective with his opinions during his reviews, yet he manages to keep his content quite entertaining at the same time. It's not hard to see why he's considered the best if you watch a few of his videos. I'll include a link to his channel in the description of this video. Let's move on to the next entry. Basically what the collaborations entry refers to is any partnership between the Nerf brand and another franchise. This ranges from things like Marvel to Fortnite to even Transformers at one point. And I'm pretty sure if you look on store shelves, chances are you're gonna find a collaboration blaster. Some of the most popular ones have been from the Minecraft and Roblox series lately. But anyways, let's move on. So now that I've finished off the first tier, it's time to move on to the second tier, the tip of the iceberg. Kicking off this tier, we have HVZ games. As far as I remember, HVZ stands for Humans vs. Zombies, and the basic premise of it, although the rule set can change from place to place, is that you have to be the longest surviving human in the game in order to win. That's basically what the biggest premise of HVZ is. Now, of course, depending on where you're playing HVZ, the rule set can change, but it has been played in all sorts of different environments, even college campuses. So, it's definitely something that I look forward to doing. Keep in mind, if you do look forward to playing HVZ, make sure you exercise quite a bit before playing your first game because it can get pretty tiring. Slamfire is a feature that is seen on a lot of different spring-powered Nerf blasters, but most commonly with the pump-action ones. And wouldn't you know it, Slamfire also happens to work best with pump-action Nerf blasters. Basically what Slamfire is, for those of you who don't know, is it is a feature where you hold down the trigger, pull the priming handle back, and then move the priming handle forward, and then it'll automatically fire once the priming handle hits the forward position. Though in some rare instances, like with the Strong Arm, Disruptor, and Eagle Point, it'll actually fire when the priming handle hits the backwards position. So, yeah, that is basically what Slamfire is, just to sum it up. Anyways, let's move on to the next entry. Basically what Vortex is, it is a Nerf series that was way too short-lived for its potential. Nah, but in all seriousness, Vortex was a series that, although it didn't last very long, was definitely very fun because it kind of strayed away from the standard dart blasters that we're all used to. Instead, we got foam disc blasters, which, although it might not sound very fun, it actually turned out to be way more fun than people could have ever imagined. Especially with blasters like the Diatron and Nitron, which we still haven't seen in the Vortex VTX reboot. Unfortunately, it looks like VTX is now also discontinued, considering we haven't seen any new blasters from that series since 2018. But I really have hopes that Hasbro reboots the series someday. Maybe someday. Basically what every blaster as a Jolt reskin refers to is it is an inside joke in the Nerf community where people often call certain blasters Jolt reskins even when those blasters have nothing mechanically similar to the Jolt. Although it wasn't started by Coop772, the joke was sort of enforced by him in like a sort of fake conspiracy video when he took apart his Longshot, Strife, and even one of his Zombie Strike chainsaw attachments, only to find jolts inside all of them. It was pretty well edited in my opinion, but don't take this too seriously. It is a complete joke. Believe it or not, there have been areas in which Nerf blasters have been used outside of battle, and not just for ranges either. They've been used plenty of times for pranks and whatnot. And I even saw one report of a woman using a Nerf blaster to keep her husband awake so that he didn't miss the birth of his child. It was pretty funny in my opinion. Let me know if there are any other cases of Nerf blasters being used outside of battle that you happen to know of. Trigger discipline is a practice commonly used by military soldiers, but also commonly used by experienced Nerfers. Now, if you haven't gotten used to using it already, I suggest you do, because it provides a lot of benefits, but most notably, it prevents accidental misfires. So, if you haven't already started practicing trigger discipline, I really recommend you start right now, in case you ever want to get into Nerf. Because, trust me, it's going to be worth it in the long run. So if you've ever opened up a Nerf blaster only to find out that it had a light gray trigger, then chances are it is what is known as a region-locked variant. This is basically a variant of a Nerf blaster that has been intentionally weakened in order to comply with certain laws from other countries, most notably Australia and New Zealand. Those countries have laws where Nerf blasters can't shoot over 50 feet per second, or over or around that. So Hasbro's solution was to create special variants for those countries only so that they could comply with those laws, and also continue to sell their standard 70 FPS Nerf blasters in the United States. This was a pretty smart move, but what would have been better is if those laws had just been abandoned entirely, because honestly, 70 FPS is nothing compared to what a modded blaster can do nowadays. Speaking of modding, modding has pretty much become a key part of the hobby nowadays. It isn't like the N-Strike attachment system where you're just swapping out different attachments. No, in modding, you're actually opening up the blaster and installing internal upgrades, like stronger springs, stronger motors, stronger batteries, and even an ammo conversion. The most popular ammo conversion is to convert any blaster to use half darts. And modding can do some pretty insane stuff nowadays. But you really have to have a lot of experience with it in order to, get a high performance modded blaster. So you might want to learn a bit about modding before you actually go and do it. I mean, just look at me. I've modded plenty of times, and pretty much every single time I've modded a blaster, it kind of failed. But anyways, let's move on. Pressure-powered blasters are a bit of an oddball. They are air-powered, but not in the traditional sense. They don't use a spring and plunger tube. Instead, they use a pressurized air tank to fire the dart. There are a few good examples of this, like the Hornet and Magstrike, and also some more modern examples like the Mediator Master Key and even the Motoblitz Underbarrel Blaster, but then there are some not so good examples of it. Secret Strike. Anyways, yeah, these used to be really popular in the modding community for how powerful they could get, but they're also a lot more difficult to modify than springers. But yeah, without further ado, that pretty much sums up this entry, so let's move on. Basically what underbarrel blaster mods are, it is a type of mod where you would cut down a blaster to convert it into an underbarrel attachment. This used to be really popular back in the mid-2010s, especially with blasters like the Rough Cut, but it hasn't really gotten too much attention nowadays, considering nowadays all it really takes to get a good underbarrel blaster is to buy one, really. The Mediator Master Key is a prime example of that. What Dart Tag is it is a series in the Nerf brand that was created in the early 2010s as a means of Nerf to try and make foam flinging into an actual sport. Sadly, not only did it fail to impress those who actually purchased blasters from the series, but it also failed to make Nerf into an actual sport. Had it succeeded in doing that, I would have actually loved to see where it went, though, to be honest. And that wraps up part 1 of the Nerf Iceberg chart. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. That would be greatly appreciated. And if you have any more ideas for future parts, please be sure to comment them. Anyways, that's all I have for today. Peace out. Oh, and special thanks to these users for helping me put together the chart.